Ready, Ryan?
Yes, ready.
Let's talk USC football. I know we've been trying to schedule this for the past month, so only a few more days to the start of the season. We made it. Thanks for doing this. I know your schedule is very busy.
It's crazy. I've got practice a couple days a week, and then of course the game's going to be this weekend. But really excited for college football to be here.
Yes.
It's just such a different feeling than months and months of an off season that you just kind of like drags on forever.
And I can imagine too, because I was, I've been doing so many of these interviews, and this is the first time I knew it was going to kind of be this way, but I didn't realize how much. It's the first time where I was like, I don't have a lot of returning guys to really zero in on. It's like a transfer fest with USC this season. There's so many transfers that this team looks like they're going to be relying on this season.
Yeah, it's so I think if you look at any publications, like one of the things that you would start the season with was like how many returners
Yes.
on offense they have, how many on defense. I mean, you can almost throw that out the window. There's some cool like advanced stats models that project returning production and all this stuff, and they don't take into consideration like you fired Clay Helton and you hired Lincoln Riley and you went and brought in like 22 guys from the transfer portal. Like it's not modeled in any of these simulations. So like how do you have to be a human to go, wow, okay, they really upgraded their coaching staff and they really added a bunch of new talent on both sides of the ball. So yeah, it's sort of a different like off season, to consume this and go. And that's why I think some of the projections are all over the place because you're not really sure. Some people are like, oh yeah, they're going to make the playoff, which I think is a stretch, but they're going to be a lot better than 4-8, just from adding the coaching staff.
Yeah. Well, that's why probably more than any other interview, having you on is going to really educate me to what's going on with this football team. So let's fill in the blanks. We know Caleb Williams is going to be the quarterback. You've been able to see a lot of good quarterbacks at USC over the years. How does he compare?
So it's really hard to say. I mean, we've only got to see 8 games of him from last year, but he does bring an element, the mobility that we haven't seen a lot.
Yeah.
Some quarterbacks had, like Sam Darnold had a little bit of it. You go way back to like Rodney Peete. But the weird part is, Greg, we haven't been able to watch like competitive periods of practice. We get to see, some of the stretching, some of the we can see Caleb Williams throwing the football around, but just routes on air, that kind of stuff. But we get to talk to him and talk to all the players. And just the sense you get from the feeling from everyone talking to him is like, man, this kid has a potential to be really special. And, he looked good in the spring game, but that's really like the only competitive action we really got to see him in. So I'm curious to see what he looks like. I mean, if you have to I'm betting on he's going to be, one of those elite kind of guys,
Yes.
Just the way he handles himself. We never even heard from him when he was at Oklahoma. Like Lincoln Riley didn't let the freshman talk at all. He got to speak before the bowl game. And before he gets to USC, he was on Good Morning America. And then every time he speaks to the media here, it's just a delight. I mean, he's just a great kid. So he seems to have all those intangibles. We just haven't been able to see him run this offense on the field outside of the game. We saw some special plays last year with Oklahoma, but haven't seen anything him wearing cardinal and gold yet.
Yeah, it's very rare that not only do you bring in a transfer quarterback, but you bring in his head coach who actually runs the offense. So it's really not going to be that much different. It's going to be the easiest transition for Caleb than any other quarterback transfer you can imagine.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking to Lincoln Riley yesterday after practice, and he'd brought up that it's one of those things where everybody on the team is either new school or new system. Like everyone has changed. So it's sort of like put everyone on the same page. But having Caleb Williams, having already run the new system, the new school part you have to overcome, but the new system you don't. Like he's done this already. And having a guy like Mario Williams who was in the system too, I think he's going to be, but they talk about him a lot, but I think he's going to be someone that Caleb Williams finds a lot. If things break down, that's a guy he knows. You got Jordan Addison out there too, who won the Politikoff last year, but you played with Mario Williams, so that might be a benefit,
Well, let's talk about those receivers. So, I mean, there aren't many other receiving duos in the country as talented as Addison and Mario Williams. So that's going to be very exciting to watch. What do we know about is it Taj Washington? What do we know about
Yeah.
Washington? Because he is somebody we know at USC who had a pretty decent season last season.
Yeah, he transferred in Memphis, and I think he was number 2 on the team, receiving, or he was up there. Just kind of not as heralded, but he's got a lot of speed. You just look at the quickness in his feet. They're a pretty deep group in the wide receiver spot, and a guy like Taj Washington didn't have tremendous production, but he was helpful for the team. They was pretty much last year was throw to Drake London, and that was about it until he got hurt. But you bring in Terrell Bynum, who's a senior from Washington. Brendan Rice, this big body kid who happens to be Jerry Rice's son from Colorado. I mean, there's outside of Mario Williams and Jordan Addison and stuff, and guys on the team. You mentioned Taj Washington, Gary Bryant Jr. I think he's someone that could potentially break out. He's got a lot of speed as well. Kyle Ford is a former 5-star that had a lot of injuries and stuff. So yeah, it's. I like Taj's game. It'll be curious to see what the rotation is, like how many guys they play, and what his role is. They were kind of throwing him weird balls last year, like stuff that didn't seem to fit his skill set. So we'll see if they kind of change that a little bit.
Okay, so you mentioned quite a bit of possibilities from and again, I know it's tough with the transfers. So the guys that you've seen before outside of Washington who were here last year, who has the biggest upside?
It's a good question. I think Kyle Ford has a ton of upside just because I saw him in high school. He just was injured so much. He missed a little bit of camp, but he's a bigger body too. And I think that Lincoln Riley likes to use those guys in different situations. You might see him more of a slot role. He loves having those guys block, but if you become like this dangerous blocker, I think it opens things up just like a tight end. It opens things up that, you're not going to be guarded as heavily, and you can get open and make some big plays. But he's really good at like just getting his hands on balls and bringing it in. He's got a really big catch radius. So someone I like. We just haven't seen much of him. He caught a touchdown pass in the game against Cal. So the final game of the season for Miller Moss, the backup quarterback. So I don't know. I've always been a Kyle Ford fan, so I think he's got a lot of upside.
Great. All right. Tight end. Does USC? Do they have a tight end on the roster worth mentioning?
Yeah, so Jude Wolf ended up getting hurt. He's going to be out, like a foot injury. He's going to be out for half the season. But they really like Lake McCree, and I'm blanking on the other name. So Lake McCree came in as a freshman, and he only had, I think it was 7 or 8 catches last year, but they all seem to be like big plays. And then Malcolm Epps is a bigger body transfer in from Texas, and I think he's going to be more of an outside threat. But you'll probably see Lake McCree in kind of that H-back spot, and then Malcolm Epps more of out in the slot kind of thing. But both those guys are capable. They're just not really deep at that spot. So they got a lot of receivers. It's just how do they kind of mix and match for this offense if they do a lot of 4 wide or whatever.
Would Wolf have been the starter?
He probably would have been. At least they kind of have 2 different spots too. So it depends on which, where you want to use those guys. But it looked like he was getting most of the first reps before he got hurt.
Okay. Offensive line. Now it looks like they have some returning starters. But Andrew Voorhees, how good could Andrew Voorhees be? He was 3rd team last year. So he's got first team capability, doesn't he?
I think so. He's Pro Football Focus loves him. If you look at any of those grades, he always gets like a high mark for the guard spot. And their interior of their line are all like 5th year or 6th year guys, which is crazy. Brett Nealon at center, Andrew Voorhees at one guard, and then Justin Dedich, who's I think he's a 5th year guy. He's a redshirt junior technically, but the COVID year, he's a team captain now, and he's the starting right guard. So the tackles will be younger. They did bring in Bobby Haskins from Virginia, so he could have a veteran presence at left tackle as well. He's still in a battle right now with Cortland Ford, but that middle of that line is, they got a ton of starts between all those guys. So, if people don't know much about the team, the offensive line is going to stink. I mean, they don't have great depth on the offensive line. There's unproven guys, but the first 6, 7 guys you feel pretty strong about, especially with all the starts those guys have in the middle of the line.
Okay. All right, now let's talk defense. So Alex Grinch also comes over. That makes life even that much more easier for Lincoln Riley. So let me ask you about Grinch. Is he a potential head coach down the line from what you've seen so far? I know, again, it's only been a few months, but he's obviously been a really good defensive coordinator now for about the last 5 or 6 years, no matter where he coaches.
Yeah, it's funny. We haven't talked to him about that, but you get the sense that he could do that, like a Justin Wilcox kind of thing, where he got the job, at Cal. I think he was a defensive coordinator at Minnesota, or not Minnesota, Wisconsin maybe at the time, and came over and became the head coach at Cal. I think there's some similar vibes there. He's got a lot of energy. He's someone that is really fun to listen to at practice. He's very hands-on. He coaches the safeties as well as being the defensive coordinator. And I think if you have any questions about USC, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball, because we saw him in the Pac-12. He did a great job at Washington State. Seemed like he did pretty good at Ohio State. Lincoln Riley credits him for turning the defense around when he came over to Oklahoma. But it happens when you get a team that scores a lot of points. Sometimes you give up points too.
Yeah.
But that's going to where USC's defense last year was historically bad, one of the worst we've ever seen. So the ceiling was, there's a high ceiling potentially, because the floor was so low last year.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's expecting miracles in the first season, because you have to eventually recruit the guys in. But there's going to be a lot of transfers as well on defense. So now the first team defensive tackle, is he the best player on defense?
So Tuli Tuipulotu, probably, yeah. I mean, he just got named a captain this week as well. Big number 49. His brother Marlon played on the team, and he's just someone that has grown into, like, his body has grown into being a leader. He was someone that never really enjoyed talking to the media. He would give like really short answers, and now he's very eloquent when you talk to him, and he just seems like he's built himself into this leader. I mean, I love Kalen Bullock as well. There's going to be some guys that have potential on this defense, but I think it starts with Tuli Tuipulotu. I mean, he's a team captain for a reason. I think he's kind of a lead by example guy that's now starting to be a little bit more vocal too.
Okay, so starting at the defensive line, are there any of the transfers so far that have seemed to have made a name for themselves, or any of the guys that are returning that we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I would go. The one guy that was out for a while at defensive tackle spot, Brandon Peely, big kid from Alaska, of all places, but he's slimmed down a little bit. He's pretty much missed most of the last couple of seasons, so I think he's going to get a little bit more run. I like Tyrone Talini coming over from Kansas State. He's probably a little undersized for like a defensive tackle, but he's been making a bunch of plays. But I think if you're going to look on the outside, Romello Height is the transfer from Auburn. It was more of a linebacker, but he's kind of like that rush end spot. He'll play on the line and gets a lot of quarterback pressures and stuff. He was banged up a little bit of fall camp, but he's been full go this week. So I expect to see him be the starter at that rush end spot. And if he can cause some havoc, I think he'd be a big asset for the defense.
Okay, and at linebacker, now this Corey Foreman, what position is he going to play?
He's also doing the rush end spot, so he's been banged up a little bit too, but he's playing behind Romello Height at that rush end spot. So we'll see what he's able to do.
And overall, the linebacking unit, a lot of new faces. So is there somebody that we should be zeroing in on over the others?
Yeah, they're kind of all like inside linebackers now. If you're an outside linebacker, you're like that rush end spot.
Yeah.
But Shane Lee is the big name, so he's a team captain too. He's the transfer from Alabama. Was a freshman All-American a couple of years ago. Then didn't play as much. Had some injuries the last couple of years, but he's just come in and has been a leader from day one. I think he's going to be your starter at middle linebacker, and having a guy like Raylan Goforth next to him, who's got starting experience too, I think makes a lot of sense. But they had a transfer that came in from Arizona State, who was another freshman All-American, Eric Gentry, who, if you look at him, he looks like a wide receiver. He's 6'6" and like a little over 200 pounds. But he's been getting first-team reps there at inside linebacker spot as well. And his name comes up a lot. Like, he just gets into passing lanes, knocking balls down. He had an interception in one of their scrimmages this fall. So he's wearing number 18. It's kind of a weird-looking number. But he's someone that everyone has talked about. And even we don't get to watch the competitive periods. And he wasn't here in the spring. He only came, over the summer. But that's a name just comes up a lot. So I think he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of run for USC at linebacker.
And then you mentioned Bullock in the secondary, so he's definitely the top guy there. How good can Bullock be?
Yeah, they called him Sticks last year. He's like kind of a thin dude. He was wearing number 27. Now He bulked up a little bit in the new weight room and the weight training. He's wearing number 7 now, and they call him double sticks. He definitely looks a lot bigger,
Okay.
but just someone that makes a bunch of plays. Like if you ask like a Jordan Addison or any of the wide receivers, like he's a guy that they bring up right away. He just makes, he's able to get the balls. The quarterbacks, Caleb Williams would talk about him. Like if you look off the safety and you think that you have this opening, and somehow he's still able to recover and get it. And so he's just someone I think is going to be a superstar for USC. Remember like a Talanoa Hufanga was, a stud for USC in the secondary. I think Caleb Bullock has that kind of potential too.
And any of the other, again, transfers or corners that you think will, stand out at some point?
Mekhi Blackman's the, redshirt senior from Colorado that transferred in, and I think he's going to be a surefire starter in the secondary. But Sayer Wright is someone that sort of was like lost maybe a little bit in the spring. He was a freshman last year, and he's a child actor. Like he was in Space Jam 2. He's in the new Grownish, TV series and stuff. And it seemed like him and Dante Williams weren't really on the same page. Almost like Dante Williams, as secondary coach, was sort of questioning, like, are you focused on football? Are you doing this acting stuff?
Yeah.
That seems to all be, under the bridge now. Maybe it was the coaches got to understand him a little better, and he understood what was expected a little better. He's still doing, I don't know how much he's acting right now. He's on that show, but he's been getting a lot of first-team reps. So
right.
It's kind of like, it's sort of like a unique USC thing. You've got like an actor that's on the team.
Yeah.
It's
predictable.
Yeah.
All right. By the way, special teams, is this going to be a strength, a weakness?
So they lost both their specialists from last year, but they had Alex Stadhouse. He was a former walk-on who they put him back on scholarship. Parker Lewis was their kicker last year. He ends up transferring out. And they lost their punter, too, who was like a 30-year-old Australian guy who went, tried the NFL water. I think he was just kind of done with school. But they get another Australian punter, and
they're all
Alden
Australian.
Sleepdog. They're all Australian. He literally came in really late. They had a freshman Australian punter signed, and we never saw a picture of him. Like, we didn't know if he existed. And then it came like the week before fall camp, Atticus Bertram, and we never knew if he existed. And then something happened, and he couldn't get in the country. I don't know what it was, but he didn't make it. So then they went out and got another one, like late, who had to, for visa purpose, he had to fly to London and then like stay there for a week, and then he could fly into the United States. But he's like a junior, had played some, I think it was the Australian rules kind of football stuff, but they'll probably be the two specialists. They got some, stud returners back there too, but they don't have a special teams coordinator anymore. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. That's just something Lincoln Riley doesn't tend to do, but they've had one for years, but he was sort of like with someone that would usurp a lot of scholarships. They would have like 5 or 6, special teams guys on scholarship. Now they have 2, and I think that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Probably, yeah. All right, taking a look at the schedule. So Rice is a really good opponent to open up with. I always believe, especially if you're going to be a contending team in some aspect, I always think it's better to start with teams that you're going to beat or you should beat, as opposed to playing those really great week 1 matchups. So that should bode well. But then it gets pretty tough after that, because tell me about the rest of the Pac-12, because even Stanford, we don't know what's going on. You tell me what's going on with Stanford, because from the East Coast perspective, it's like, what's going on with Stanford? But they're talented. They got a good quarterback, and we know Oregon State's a lot better. So Stanford road, Oregon State road, Utah road, and UCLA on the road. So those are some tough road games, and even Arizona is going to be better.
Yeah, I think Rice is a good opponent because they're kind of like a Stanford-ish offense, so you sort of get a warm-up to Stanford. Yeah, Stanford was terrible last year. I don't, and they can't really add transfers. They don't add very much. Tanner McKee is a great quarterback, but I just think they're not going to be very good. Like if USC loses on the road to Stanford, they're going to have some major problems. I mean, they were 3-9 team last year, but they beat USC. They beat them badly, and they beat Oregon, who didn't have their like offensive coordinator was sick, whatever. But Stanford was not good. I don't think they're going to be that good.
Does that mean that's it for Shaw, by the way? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you think because if they're not good again, is that it for Shaw?
I don't know if they care as much, like they love Shaw. They were 3-9 last year, Greg. You know how many coaches they changed up? None. Like they didn't fire a single coach. 3-9. You didn't fire one coach. You didn't make one change. He said they made changes to like what they were doing. but not the people that are doing. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So I'm not predicting. Maybe they turn things around. They had a good COVID year, but besides that, they've been bad. I just think they're not going to be very good. But Oregon State didn't lose at all last year in Corvallis.
Yeah.
They were undefeated. They beat Utah last year when Utah was good. Utah lost games early, but once they made Cam Rising the quarterback, they didn't lose except to on the road to Oregon State. So that's definitely going to be tough. They don't have a great defense, but they can run the ball on you. They pushed USC around last year. The game at Utah, week 7, that's the one you got to circle. That's the biggest one. Probably the 2 best teams in the conference. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Washington. This is the big one. UCLA pushed them around last year, scored 62 points or whatever it was on them. It's the Rose Bowl, so it's not really a road game, but that's one of those things where I think you got to play them well. And they play Notre Dame at the end of the year, which I'm not super high on Notre Dame this year. We'll see how they do, but it sets up, I think, pretty well. But are they going to lose some games you shouldn't lose, like the teams of USC in the past, or are they just going to score a whole bunch of points? And even if you don't play that well, you've scored enough to win. We'll, I'm going to have to wait and see.
What are you thinking? Like maybe second place?
Yeah, I think so. I think like a 9-3, and then maybe second place to Utah. But then you the potential to play Utah again because the divisions are gone now. So even though they're in the same division, if they have a better record than anyone in the North and like they lose to Utah, they could rematch Utah in Las Vegas. So it would be a neutral site instead of playing in Salt Lake City. Now I was at the Pac-12 championship game last year. It was not a neutral site. Like it was like 90% Utah fans. Like Utah was fired up for that game, and they just boat raced Oregon in that one. So so it'll be interesting to see. Maybe more USC fans come out for that one. But yeah, I think second place is probably fair. They definitely have more upside. I mean, if they won the conference, I'm not going to be like that's shocking. But it's hard at this point. You got to say, Utah's such a complete team. They bring a lot of people back. I'm going to, until someone beats them, I'm going to be picking Utah.
And by the way, we shouldn't have just skipped over Fresno, the second home game, because that should be a good Fresno team. And didn't Fresno beat UCLA last year?
They did. And they bring Jeff Tedford back. Jake Haener was the quarterback, and he beat UCLA like almost by himself. Like it was just, there wasn't a lot of help. So, they lost their coach, but, Kalen DeBoer goes up to Washington. But you get Jeff Tedford back, and Kalen DeBoer you thought he was going to leave, and he stayed. So, that's a dangerous team for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they won 10 games last year, so.
Yes. And like you said, you bring Haener back a quarterback, and you get a coach like Tedford. That's, that might even be the toughest game. Would you say Stanford or Fresno? Which one's tougher?
No, Fresno. I would say that's tougher. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
See?
I think Fresno's going to be a lot better than Stanford this year. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I called it last year. I said, I was saying Stanford was going to be terrible, and then everyone got on me because they beat USC, and I'm like, well, USC's terrible too.
Yeah, right.
And then they beat Oregon, and I was like,
uh-oh.
Yeah, that didn't look right. And then, so they were like, see, they're good. And then they lost like the rest of their games. I'm like, nope, they were bad. Like,
that's the thing about the Pac-12 though. Is like, do you think if does Utah have to? Let's say if Utah wins again, does Utah have to go undefeated to play in the playoffs?
That I think they have to beat Florida in the opener because that's on the road, and Florida's a mediocre team. But if you lose that game, I think it doesn't legitimize their season. So I think if you win in the Swamp, that's something like that's a feather in your cap, and. If they lose some weird road game, like they lose at Oregon, but they win the rest of their games, and then they win the Pac-12 championship game, I think they can make it in, depending on what happens. But I don't think you can lose that out of conference game. Like you can't lose. Like I think they play BYU. You can't lose at Florida, especially because Florida's going to be a middle of the road SEC team. So beat the pants off Florida, maybe lose a close game at Oregon, and I think they could still get in.
Yeah, because the first thing people are going to say if they lose to Florida is, you see. And Florida's not even a top SEC team.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why it's an important game for the Pac-12. So look, it's going to, so before I let you go, how many more, do we have one? Is this the last year of the way the same teams, or when does this start changing? We have 2 more years?
So 2 years. It'll be 2024 where USC and UCLA head to the Big Ten.
The Big Ten.
We don't know the schedule for next year. They got rid of divisions this year, but they didn't change the schedule format. So you're still playing everyone in your division plus a couple from the other, or 4 from the other division. And so maybe that goes away next year. But with USC and UCLA leaving, maybe they just keep the same sort of schedule. It's hard to say. Or things, Greg, you know, this could get blown up more than what we even know right now. I mean, the Big 12 just is, they're moving up there, media rights negotiating. If they can get some kind of better deal, that might lure away like the Arizona schools, or who knows? Like
It's crazy.
it's a battle going on,
Yeah,
out there.
it
But
is. How do
yeah.
you must like it though? It gives you an opportunity to maybe even travel to places that you haven't traveled before to.
Yeah, like I've been to Columbus, I've been to the Horseshoe, but like never to the Big House. There's, it'd be cool to go to Camp Randall, like some of that stuff, Penn State. They're hard to get to, but I think it would be a lot of fun. And it's been a crazy offseason. I mean, hiring Lincoln Riley was like, just everything went crazy. Like USC fans were so tired of Clay Helton. Once they hired Lincoln Riley, they just came back in droves. And then whole offseason with the number one transfer class, joining the Big Ten. Like there's just been all these positive things in the offseason, which USC fans are not used to. And I'm happy for me to cover it because it's just
Oh yeah.
it's a lot more fun to interact with people that are happy than when they're pissed off.
Oh yeah. And now there's, like you said, that's why I guess you referenced in the beginning of the show, can't wait for the football games to begin. So
yeah,
it's
I mean,
like
it's
been very busy.
positive.
Let's play football.
Yeah, it's been good to have positive stuff in the off season. I mean, we'll cover whatever, but it's been weird just to see like all the stuff that's happening has been positive, but there's only so much off-season stuff you can do. You can only win the off-season so many times.
Exactly.
And if you go out and like lay an egg against Rice and win 27-20 or something, everyone's gonna be like, "Uh-oh, that's bad." So, yeah.
Ryan, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I know you're always busy, and hopefully we'll get a chance to maybe even talk to you during the season. But I'm glad we get to do this every preseason. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
You got it.